Hey everyone, welcome to a new feature here at Chrisicisms called the Chrisicisms Conversations. This is something I've wanted to do for a while. It allows me to sit down with someone who is doing interesting work in film, culture, faith, whatever I find interesting, whatever I think you might find interesting, and talk to them for a bit about the work they're doing. I hope to do this more regularly. I have a few set up already, and I'm really excited about this, but I don't know that I can top this first one. I have wanted to talk to Jeffrey Overstreet for a long time. I mean, as you'll hear in this conversation, I've wanted to talk to him for almost 2 decades about film, about criticism, about faith, about beauty in the arts. And when he announced that his new book was coming out, Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema, I knew I wanted to sit down with him. And he was very gracious to set up some time and very gracious to allow that time to be even longer than I had expected. This was a great conversation, and I'm really thrilled that you guys get to hear it. I hope you'll subscribe. I hope we'll be able to have some new conversations coming up soon. But for now, please enjoy this conversation with Jeffrey Overstreet about his new book, Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema. Extremely excited to be talking with Jeffrey Overstreet today. Jeffrey is someone I've been reading for a long time. He is a professor and writer in residence at Seattle Pacific University. He writes about film, music, and a whole host of other things at jeffreyoverstreet.com. It is well worth a subscription. He is the writer of the fantasy novels Aurelia's Colors, Cinder's Midnight, Raven's Ladder, and the Aleboy's Feast. He is also the author of Through a Screen Darkly, and his new book, Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema, was just released. Jeffrey, thank you for coming on and talking to me.
It's my pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much. This has been a long time coming. We've been chatting about things online for so many years. I'm surprised we haven't done this before. So yeah.
No, and I owe you so much thanks. It was about 20 years ago. I was working as a reporter at a weekly paper. They graciously allowed me to start publishing film reviews for them. And so it got me on screening lists. I was part of the Detroit Film Critics Society. Because I was working at a weekly newspaper, I also had a second job, and that was at a Bible bookstore. And one night, one of my colleagues comes up to me and says, "Chris, I think you should read this book. This seems up your alley." And it was Through a Screen Darkly. And I'll admit I was a little hesitant because I grew up in Christian subculture. And what I knew of as Christian reviews was pluggedin.com. And I started looking through the book and I was very surprised. I'm like, oh, Taxi Driver's in here. Babette's Feast is in here. Life of Brian's in here. I didn't know you could do that and they would sell it here. There's not a chapter on Braveheart at all. And that book changed my life and has been an amazing influence in my writing, in my film viewing. I am indebted to what you wrote in that book and also your subsequent writing, which also had the nice effect of introducing me to the music of Over the Rhine, which every single year my wife and I are seeing them in Ann Arbor when they come to do their Christmas show.
Oh wow. Yeah. Their Seattle stop, which is usually right around Thanksgiving. They play at a place called the Triple Door here, which is a place you can get dinner during the concert, and we've come to refer to that as our Thanksgiving dinner every year. So yeah, I'm so grateful for them as well.
I am trying to convince my wife one year to go to the Nowhere Else Festival. I would love to go. It's only like 3 or 4 hours from us, and I'm
Oh
trying to convince
wow.
her one year.
Yeah, boy, if we were that close, we'd be there every single year. Yeah, it's we've been there twice. It's there's no festival like it. And the musicians themselves will say that from the stage, because of the way the crowd is so attentive that they let the last note of every song fade to silence
Mm.
before they applaud. And you can just see, I saw a band there recently where at the end of a song, the players would just look at each other at the end of a song like they could just feel attention like they'd never
Mm.
felt it before. So yeah, I hope you get to go there. It's a remarkable place. Something very sacred going on there.
One year we will make it, and
Yeah.
it'll be great.
I finished the book last night. I finished Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema just last night. I finished it in a flurry of mental note taking, writing down new movies for my watch list, and wiping away tears because this is a very powerful, beautiful read. I love this book.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Thank you.
and I'm curious, you've been working on this, I think you said 11 years elsewhere, correct?
Not intentionally, but
Okay.
yes. It was supposed to be a project of maybe 3 years. A lot's happened since this project started. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, how is the Jeffrey Overstreet who writes Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema different than the one who wrote Through a Screen Darkly? And what did you want to do differently with the book this time out?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer is he's 20 years older. Through a Screen Darkly came about almost in desperation. I had been writing reviews for Christianity Today for a couple of years and writing reviews on my own website for several years. And that, I mean, I started my own stuff online around the time people started building their first websites. So the timing was remarkable. I was one of the first Christians writing about film outside the context that you were describing earlier, the sort of what we'll call it the plugged in approach,
Mm-hmm.
where most movie coverage was about warning parents, cautioning families, and providing these sort of morality checklists of how much swearing, how
Yeah.
much nudity, how much violence, and yet curiously avoiding lots of other sensitive and potentially upsetting subjects. And I just found that to be an incredibly unhelpful approach to art. And we weren't talking about literature that way in Christian media, and if we were talking about the arts at all. And so I wanted to approach art as art and engage in interpretation, engage in appreciation, practice discernment, and talk about movies online the way we would talk about a Shakespeare play in an English class at any of the Christian schools I'd attended growing up. I just didn't understand this seemingly false dichotomy. And so Christianity Today saw what I was doing and said, we would like to take this approach. And I was amazed and grateful to be invited to do that for them. It was quite a thrill, actually, because that was the only magazine I ever remember my dad subscribing to.
Hmm.
So to get to become a part of that was just kind of felt miraculous. And then a few years into that, one lesson I had learned was when you're on a platform as big as Christianity Today, you are going to get a whole lot more angry reader mail than you got on your own little website. And the reactions to what I was doing, approach to film, and what I was, I mean, I don't mean to act like I was the only one. I found critics like Stephen Gradanis this way, Peter Chataway, eventually Alyssa Wilkinson and others.
Mm-hmm.
We found each other and kind of formed this community of critics trying to establish the conversation that we had been missing growing up. But boy, did it make evangelical readers uncomfortable because a lot of evangelicals are not comfortable with any ambiguity, are not comfortable with uncertainties. They had their systems for grading and judging art, and they did not like the vulnerability you have to take on to venture into the wider world of art, open to surprise, open to discovery. They did not want the difficult work of developing discernment on complicated questions. And so I just have files and files and files full of emotional reactions, not thoughtful reactions, but emotional reactions. You know, because of my opinion of Shrek, I would get a letter from somebody telling me that I needed to accept Jesus as my personal savior.
Oh,
Because
wow.
of my review of Titanic, I would get letters from some Christians telling me that I needed to accept Jesus as my personal savior, and letters from other Christians saying that if I didn't give this a perfect review, I obviously didn't know the first thing about love. And just these emotional eruptions. And I was like, can't we just calm down and have a civil conversation about our different experiences of these things? Because there is no single right answer on a work of art. And so Through a Screen Darkly became my attempt to answer those messages because there was no short answer that was going to be sufficient if the person who wrote that reaction was even open to listening anyway. And the only way I knew to respond sufficiently was to tell something of a life story. And so Through a Screen Darkly is filled with anecdotes about my life and how I would encounter these movies and they would speak into my experiences and open my eyes and my ears and my imagination to new things that would ironically increase my faith rather than corrupting it as I had been told would happen. So that book was very much a justification of the ways of art to frightened evangelicals. And it's sort of systematic that way. You know, there's a chapter on movies about alienation and a chapter about follow your heart and a chapter about heroes. Once that was out, I started getting invitations to talk about these things to Christian audiences all over the world. And that was unexpected and quite a thrilling adventure. And I just saw the conversations growing and growing. Again, I'm not taking credit for them. I think they were already growing, and somehow this book gave them a way to sort of organize the conversation. Out of that experience came this strong desire to write a different kind of book that was not an attempt to justify anything or explain anything, but something that was just a celebration of how the mysteries of art, the beauty of art, had been a formative influence on my faith. And it helped me start learning to discern what was true gospel and what was layers of sort of cultural distortion that had been sort of accumulating on top of that. And so movies continued to increase my attention to the scriptures focus on fear not being the most common refrain in the Bible. While my Christian culture kept telling me to fear this, fear that, be afraid of the world, withdraw from the world, don't get involved with the world. And then my scripture memorization would say, for God so loved the world that he held nothing back. And so I wanted to point to the movies that were helping me say, wow, that what I've been taught in the scriptures, what Jesus' example and Jesus' teachings tell me, I find affirmed, I find increased, I find resonating in these great works of art. And that has helped me sort of tear myself free of the brambles of all of sort of corruption and misinterpretation and binary thinking, the sort of us versus them worldviews of the churches and the Christian communities I'd grown up in. So I hope that people experience the book as a celebration. And once again, and even much more deliberately now, this book is a life story. It starts in early childhood and moves into my elementary school days and my middle school days, my high school experiences, my college experiences, my vocational pursuits, my marriage, and then beginning to get to the point in life where you sort of turn a corner and you're experiencing more losses than gains. And for each chapter, there's a movie or two, or in a couple of cases, three, where I talk about how by looking at the world through the lenses of those movies, I make so much more sense of my life experience, the world around me, the scriptures in front of me. And so I hope it feels more like a memoir than the first one. I hope it feels more like a celebration than the first one. And I hope that whether or not people come away excited about these particular movies, that they come away with a newer way of seeing. It's like I tell my students in my film classes, I'm not here to make you love these films. I'm here to encourage you to see differently, to teach your eyes to discern new things that you have been missing. And I hope that to some extent this book can do that, even though I still consider myself a beginner at these things. So.
One thing I thought was interesting was I looked at the back cover of Through a Screen Darkly, which says it's a travelogue of dangerous moviegoing. But I looked at your Goodreads page, which describes it as a memoir of dangerous moviegoing. And I thought about it. I'm like, oh, that actually would be more accurate of Lost and Found. It is this very autobiographical work. It's such a good mix of autobiography with solid film criticism and theological imagination. And I think that's what's so moving is I've been reading you for 20 years. And I feel like with this book, oh, I got to know more about you. And the best books can do that and then help me understand more about myself through that. I was just having a conversation with a critic buddy the other night, and we were talking about reviews that have influenced us, critics that have influenced us, and somehow the topic got to how much of yourself do you put into a review? Because when you're starting off, you're really told don't insert yourself into the review, which I think is sometimes very helpful if you're teaching analysis and things like that. But I think some of the best critics know when to break that rule. Roger Ebert was also fantastic about that from time to time.
Yes, he
Um,
was.
and there's this conversation you have to have where you're interrogating the film, but the film is also interrogating you, and you're having this back and forth conversation. And I'm wondering, how hard was it to find that balance for this book between the personal and maybe the more academic appreciation?
Well, I mean, it's a spectrum for both books, and the needle tilts one way or another on the spectrum. It's much more into the memoir aspect in this one. That has a lot to do with where the reviews were coming from. I mean, when I wrote Through a Screen Darkly, I was writing movie reviews for
Mm-hmm.
Christianity Today, and so the book is the needle tilts much more in the direction of issues. You know, the chapters are about films that explore particular questions or particular issues, and it's organized that way. And then I sort of pepper those chapters with anecdotes from my life. This I had sort of turned in my badge at Christianity Today because I'd gotten restless. I'd gotten restless with the form of film reviews. And I started writing for Image because I wanted to experiment with the form. I wanted to write a whole lot more personally. I didn't want to write to accomplish the goal of a review, which is to help a reader decide if they should go see this movie or not. I was much more interested in pursuing questions that movies stirred up. And so I was writing about movies from different, that had been around for 30 years, 1 week, 1 or 2 weeks, and then I would write about something that had just come out. But there was always a bigger question sort of guiding that particular installment of that series that I did for Image. And I wrote about 100 or so of those. So after a few years of writing those for Image, at the same time that I was speaking around the world about these experiences and about these ideas, I kept getting encouragement to become a teacher. People kept saying, you need to be in front of students doing this kind of thing all the time because students need these kinds of challenges. And especially in Christian culture, students are lacking the skills they need in order to be discerning about art and culture. And I liked the idea of that as long as I could continue writing.
Mm-hmm.
So my wife and I both, Anne and I, decided to pursue grad school. It had taken, we'd been out of school for 20 years or more now. And so in 2014, we both became students in Seattle Pacific University's MFA in Creative Writing program, to which this book is dedicated, and found there the best experience we'd ever had in Christian education. Just the most thoughtful mentors, incredible writers who I would aspire to imitate, however awkwardly. And so, under the mentorship of Lauren Winner and Paula Houston, both writers I look up to tremendously, I began playing with even more ambitious kinds of essays. And some of those essays were about film. And so some chapters of this book started as essays in that program. The chapter about the Black Stallion started there. The chapter about Watership Down started there. And I started really finding what felt like, okay, I think I have finally found the form that feels most personal to me, the form that kind of fulfills what I've always been reaching for with these things. The Christianity Today reviews were great practice for many years, but they were never large enough to contain what I wanted to accomplish. And so these are long chapters. This book has 13 substantial chapters,
Mm-hmm.
and they're very sort of meandering essays at first glance, I think. But my hope is that by the end of them, people see how all of the pieces are working together to point toward a larger idea that is very difficult to paraphrase. And so I guess that's kind of an indirect way to answer your question, but I've been on quite a journey of looking for the right form, looking for the thing that feels like this is the best variation on film criticism for me, that allows me to share the things I want to share and ask the questions I want to ask. Having said that, there are a lot of other changes too. I mean, graduate school I learned so much there. But the world has changed a lot in the last 10 years. And a lot of the things that I started the book celebrating are fading or already gone. That master's program is gone. Many of my mentors are gone. Lucy Shaw, Eugene Peterson. Support for the arts in America is vanishing quickly and threatened by so many different kinds of forces. The kind of diversity that I was celebrating in the book is under attack more viciously than in my entire lifetime. And the university at which I work and that I love so much. It's a liberal arts university, but the English department that was once 15 full-time faculty strong is, we're down to 5 or 6 now. We no longer have a theater department. We no longer have majors in philosophy or film. There's just so much about the life of the mind and the imagination that is diminished right now. And I think it is a catastrophic mistake for Christian institutions to start cutting down those branches, thinking that these are productive decisions. So the book is very much, in the end, kind of a lament for what we're losing and a plea, really, by example, by saying, this is what the arts have done for me and my faith and for so many around me. We need to strengthen the things that remain, to borrow a line from the scriptures.
I work during the day at a university in Detroit, and we're a substantially large university, but that same struggle is there. I work on marketing materials all the time, and the lean is to, let's talk about medicine, let's talk about law, and I have to go back and remind, let's put in a few sentences about the arts. We have a very good performing arts college. We have a very good communication program, and I imagine with Christian education, private education, it's even more of a struggle.
Yeah, definitely. And yet, the most celebrated and probably best known graduate of my university is Eugene Peterson,
Mm-hmm.
who has written so many influential books on theology and whose paraphrase of the scriptures, The Message, is a global phenomenon. I love the fact that no less an influencer than Bono drives around with a box of copies of Eugene Peterson books in the trunk of his car to give to people. And when you asked Eugene Peterson about his vision, about his convictions, about his passion for the gospel, he would tell you that it was much more greatly inspired by artists than theologians, and that theater was a venue where God does unique things, has a distinctive presence and influence. I wish we paid more attention to that.
Absolutely. I start every year with reading Along Obedience in the Same Direction. It's every
Yeah.
year for the last 10 years. I've been going through that. And it's funny, the church I grew up in did not like the message at all. And
Mm.
I've found it so helpful as I've gotten older to get that other perspective, that refreshing look at the
Mhm.
words. One thing I want to come back to is you started talking about form, and I was so happy you did, because I just spent several months working in what I would call the content mines. There is a large website I was working for because, hey, it was money to write about films. And I quickly learned, oh, everything has to be in a template. Everything has to be these 2 paragraphs, 3 sections, certain keywords, link back to other articles. And it was soul killing. I wrote 100 articles for them over the course of nearly a year, and I can't remember half of them.
Mhm.
And when I was talking to my critic friend the other night about it, I started talking about how no one really thinks about form anymore. They don't think about the language of criticism. And one of the big exceptions has always been your willingness to do what I would call slow criticism, to take your time with an article, to not worry about hitting opening weekend, to make sure you've thought through the film, but also to experiment with the form. One thing that I called out was your all thumbs reviews from a few years back. The short story reviews, which
Wow.
I can understand that was probably not sustainable to write about every movie in that mode.
Yeah. It took
But
a lot of time.
I loved the experiment. It was the stories you had about these clerks reviewing films together, talking about films together. It was a reminder that this is a conversation,
Yeah.
but also this reminder that every critic, when they sit down to write, has 20 different people in them arguing about what they think about the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, often I'm just like, I don't know how to narrow down my experience of this film into an opinion, but I'm happy to share the conversation that's going on in my head or the arguments I'm already having with other critics, either already having those arguments or imagining how those arguments are going to go. And also at the time, I was craving a way to continue to write about film, but also to keep my fiction writer tools sharpened. And so I really enjoyed that experiment, and I maybe someday I'll go back to that. But yeah, I'm delighted that you remember those so fondly. I don't think many people read them, but it was a joy to experiment with that. Yeah, I think that the form experiment it makes me think about how once in a while there are certain students in my classes who I'll see their eyes light up when I mention something, I quote somebody or I point to an idea or we look up a definition of something. And I'll be like, mental note, ask them after class, what were they so excited about right there? Because I didn't track that. And what will happen is they will say, I just couldn't believe we were talking about this because we were just talking about that same thing in my psychology class a few hours ago, or my history class, or my engineering class. And I love those moments because it affirms that whenever you're talking about something true, or whenever you're talking about something beautiful, there is no boundary around that thing. It will connect you to all kinds of things in life. And that's the whole idea of a university, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is to say we're going to look at the world through all these different lenses, and what we learn, what we see through one lens is going to inform what we understand through another lens. And the more these things are in dialogue, the fuller our vision becomes of what is actually true. That's how beauty works. That's why scientists more and more are learning to recognize that something is true by developing a sense that what they're discovering is actually beautiful.
Mm.
Beauty is a way of, is a vocabulary about truth. And so I wanted a form that would give me the freedom to point to something in the movie and then turn to the brain scientist Dr. John Medina and share something he's discovered about the brain, and then turn to a passage from an Annie Dillard book, and then talk about the pet rabbit I had when I was 11 years old, and have the readers be able to say, oh, all of these things are connected. All of these, when we hold all of these pieces at the same time, something else becomes visible, almost like a magic eye painting. I've never been good at those, but I
No.
understand the concept. That if you stand in front of a magic eye painting and you're focused on all those little dots, suddenly this sort of 3D image of something unexpected emerges.
Mhm.
And that's the effect I want with these essays. I want people to be like, why are we talking about this now? And why are we talking about, oh, I see the connection. Annie Dillard, speaking of Annie Dillard, has an extraordinary book called For the Time Being that does this more powerfully than I've ever experienced it anywhere else. She talks about clouds that have been recorded in historical documents. She talks about birth defects. She talks about the Terracotta Army being unearthed. She talks about the great writer and explorer and scientist Pierre de Desjardins. I haven't said his name out loud in a while, and I'm getting the syllables mixed up. Anyway, and I remember reading this book as a big fan of Annie Dillard going, this is weird. We're just cycling through these subjects and then cycling through them again and cycling through them again. And each time she has something new to say, why are they all in the same book? And then there comes a point in the book when it's sort of like, oh, wow. Because we've been talking about all these things, now we are able to talk about this. And, most poets are not, poets are famous for not wanting to explain the poem because if they could explain the poem, they wouldn't need to write the poem. But Annie Dillard gets to a point in that book where she turns and she's like, I should probably say something about what this is all about, and kind of takes you by the hand and guides you into the bigger vision. And I came away from that book just thinking, I don't think I could ever write this book. But this is what happens in my mind when I'm watching a movie. And Lord willing, after the movie, if there's time enough, then I sit down with people or I get online with people and we have a conversation, and that gives me new realizations, and I want to go back and see it again if it's any good. And so I want a form that encourages that recognizes that imitates that, and that's hopefully going to stir up a bunch of conversations that make me want to go back and write yet another essay about that film in 10 years, or, or 3 weeks.
It,
So it's meant to be kindling for conversation.
it's like a diamond, right? You are looking at things from all these different perspectives, and
Yeah.
the light's hitting it different each time you
Yeah.
turn that diamond. I think
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way. And then Justin Chang said something about the book where he compared the chapters to jewels. And first of all, just completely blown away that one of my heroes would say that about these chapters. But then I was really taken with the metaphor, because I'm like, I guess that's kind of what I'm going for, is I want something that refracts. I want something that as you turn it, it catches the light lots of different ways.
Yeah, and there are recurring themes that come up that connect differently. Storms are really huge in this. I noticed you
Yeah.
had a lot of movies that dealt with storms, and the
Yeah.
way that all connects is really beautiful and powerful, and talks about kind of being shaken out of, maybe the safer places where we go to hide.
Maybe that comes from just being a Pacific Northwest boy. I don't know, but
Yeah, we don't have that
yeah,
much
there's a
here in
lot of
Michigan.
storms. There's a lot of play. These are things I didn't really realize until I was kind of working on the final drafts and realizing, oh, I didn't even notice. Someone pointed out recently, I hadn't even noticed it when I turned the book in, that it begins with puppets, with Pinocchio, the Muppets, and then it ends with little stop motion Marcel the Shell with Shoes
Mm.
on. And they said something about how that was just so great how you ended with a figure of childlike play again, which is where we started. And I was like, wow, well that was not intentional at all. That's just one of those. Sometimes the project you're working on knows more than you do about what's happening. So
I think the way you write about play and creativity especially in those first few chapters when you're talking about your childhood, it was so beautiful to read because it drew me back to my childhood where I would go see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Maybe not the greatest thing to be watching at 10, but I'd see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and I would go back and have to have a sequel right away. And the only way I could get that is if I sat down and scribbled it down with my friends. And that is a thing that comes throughout your childhood. You're seeing these movies, you're going home, you're making puppets, you're drawing pictures, you're writing stories. And I loved reading that because on one hand, it mirrored my experiences, but it felt so much more intense than my experiences. Where I think after a few books, I kind of was just like, okay, now there's a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie out. I can actually go see it. And it struck me, you're growing up largely in an age pre VHS, I would say, correct?
well, let's see. VHS started. We started getting tapes and video stores in the mid 80s, or early to mid 80s, and I would have been 13, 12 or 13. I think the first home video of Raiders of the Lost Ark was available in 1981 or 82. Well, it came out in 81. I think it was available on video in 82. So yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, you had to hope it came on television, on
Mm-hmm.
network television. A lot of the Disney movies I only really saw in pieces when they would show excerpts from them on The Wonderful World of Disney
Mm-hmm.
on, I think, NBC on Sunday nights.
I wonder if having that scarcity was part of inspiring your creativity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, that's part of what the Pinocchio chapter is about. And Roberto Benigni accepting his Oscar, thanking his parents for poverty,
Mm.
because it was scarcity that threw fuel on the fire of his imagination. And he had to make things instead of just go get things. And there's the great saying from Rumi that new organs of perception come into being as a result of necessity. Therefore, oh man, he says, increase your necessity that you may increase your perception. And then again with the this phenomena of making these connections, right? then you have Dr. John Medina, the brain scientist, saying the best thing you can give your child is not an iPad, not, all of these strategies for turning your kid into a genius. The best thing you can do for the development of your child's brain is give them a cardboard box, some scissors, a box of crayons in 2 hours.
Hmm. I've seen it with my
That's
kids. Yeah.
that's what's going to strengthen their mind. That's what's going to enable their vision. Yeah, and so I mean there's a lot in the book that's critical of the culture in which I grew up, but I hope equal and opposite to that, or complementary to that, there is a sense of gratitude for the childhood I had with parents who gave me anything I might possibly need for the purpose of creativity, rather than just for the purpose of distraction and entertainment.
I do have to say, if I was going to have anyone program a film festival for families and children, you would be the first person I call because it's just such a
Wow.
fantastic list of movies. And also, I was really glad you wrote about the mini adventures of Winnie the Pooh, which is
Hmm.
a movie I didn't really go back to as a kid. But
Hmm.
I have a memory of one of my first theatrical experiences seeing that movie. And I remember nothing else about the movie. I'm sure I caught up with shorts, as you said, when they played on Wonderful World of Disney. But the moment at the very end where it goes from live act or from animation to live action, and
Yeah.
there's the stuffed Pooh Bear
Yeah.
that winks at you. And I had
Hmm.
to have been 3 or 4 when I saw that. And
Hmm.
it was not my first movie in theaters, but it was like a bolt of electricity. I was like, it can do
Yeah.
that. It like
Yeah.
that's magic. And I often think of that.
Yeah.
I also have to say I love that there is a chapter that is a thank you letter to Jim Henson. I knew
Mm.
you would have that. You were the one who connected me back with the Muppets when I was about to turn 30. I thought, oh, I need to go back to the Muppet movie. But I love that there's a chapter dedicated to Jim Henson in there. And that again, one of the last things you write about in the book is having Big Bird's feather on your desk.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and
It's in a frame right now. It's in a frame, just right there. I'm pointing at it, and then you've got the Kermit the Frog
mhm.
that has been with me since I was 8 or 9 years old, and that I still take with me to film class one night out of the year to surprise the class with a visit from Kermit. Um, but yeah, I feel like I learned more. I mean, very specifically about what Christian faith can be, what Christian freedom can be from Jim Henson, even though he did not speak explicitly about religious faith, or at least not very often. He led by example, and he lived in a kind of faith that drew children to him the way I imagine children were drawn to Jesus. We were told children were drawn to Jesus. But also, there was no hint of prejudice. There was no shred of exclusionary policies in his work. And the Muppet movie is nothing if not a celebration of inclusion and what that makes possible. This is kind of a thread through so many of the most influential stories in my life, Watership Down included. I'm reading Watership Down again with a class
Mm.
right
Oh,
now.
really?
We're getting ready to watch the movie, and they are picking up more than previous classes. They are picking up on just how central in the story of Watership Down the strategies of Hazel, the leader of this group of rabbits that's trying to find a new home in the wilderness, how their successes come about because Hazel goes out of his way to include somebody that those rabbits would never have typically included in their community. He befriends a mouse, and the rabbits are just, what are you doing? And then he befriends a bird, and those decisions end up having so much to do with why the rabbits survive, why they find the kind of home they've been looking for, why they become fully what rabbits are meant to be. And that is meant to be a picture to us. Watership Down is not a preachy Christian novel, but it is a vision of the kingdom of God. It's thrilling to see students picking up on that, because that's a theme that's very important to that age group right now. I mean, the attacks they're seeing on so many meaningful parts of their own community. They're like, no, you don't get to just decide that a part of the body is unnecessary
Mm.
unless you want to harm the whole body. Henson understood that. And I include in the book an excerpt from a great book called Jim Henson The Works, that is a long quotation from Harry Belafonte, where he talks about what he has seen with his own two eyes in some of the most unlikely places in the world, some of the poorest places in the world, where the influence of Jim Henson is strong. And I'm like, that should be the kind of witness that the gospel has.
And
Um, and so rarely has because of how badly it's understood and how badly it is embraced and embodied in the world.
I read an article years back now that argued that Generation X should be called the Henson generation. Not just because
I'm all for
he
that.
was he taught them how to read and write, but from what you're saying, I think there's a shift in being willing to accept others that we learned through Sesame Street, we learned through the
Yeah,
Muppets and Fraggle Rock, and I've always loved that idea. I've always told people I am part of the Henson generation. I'm not Generation X.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so we both grew up in church communities that I think kind of look skeptically at the movies and pop culture. Um, I was several different flavors of Baptist for the first 40 years of my life. But the church I grew up in for the first 12 years was particularly stringent. My dad had to sign a form when he was a deacon saying we would not enter a movie theater, which is
Yeah.
how my mom ended up sneaking us in to see Care Bears. I am the only person in the world who had to sneak in to see Care Bears. I was not allowed to watch He-Man because only God is the master of the universe. So, I can at least use that as an excuse in a few weeks to avoid seeing the new He-Man. But like I remember my mom sitting me down. I wrote about this just a few weeks ago. My mom sat me down when I was 8 with this letter in hand from the church saying, there's this movie out about Jesus, and it says a lot of bad things, and you need to promise me you will not go see The Last Temptation of Christ. I'm 9 years old and I want to see Short Circuit too. Like I'm not, but it kind of freaked me out. But the more I thought about it over the years, that was the moment where it kind of cracked me open that, oh, movies are not just this fun thing. They're not just this distraction. They can be dangerous. They can kind of make people angry or provoke discussion. And I feel like you have that same curiosity that the things we were kind of restricted from are the things that maybe led us to be a little more interested in art and cinema and explore these things. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, yeah. Although I want to be careful that I don't convey that anything we were warned against, you should just throw yourself at those things. I mean, there are a
Sure.
lot of potentially harmful things in the
Mhm.
world, but it's so much better to develop discernment about them rather than just accept one person's fearful assessment. I mean, how many times was I warned by people about things in the church when I was younger, only to find out that they had no actual experience of that thing.
Mhm.
They were just relaying these alarms that they'd heard from somebody else who'd heard it from somebody else. There's that great verse in Ephesians, have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness. And I heard that ad nauseum growing up. But there's more to the verse. It says, have nothing to do with the unfruitful deeds of darkness. Instead, expose them. And that sounds to me like a call to artists or a
Mhm.
call to all of us when it comes to how we engage with art and culture. Have nothing to do with evil, but the arts are an arena in which people investigate evil and sometimes indulge in ways that are harmful, yes, but you have to develop discernment about that. Almost any arena of our lives, well, not almost, every arena of our lives is corrupt in some way and can be used for evil.
Mhm.
Everything people love can be exploited for harmful purposes. I mean, if you love basketball and you are aware of the harms that come with sports gambling, should we just then say, well, we should just erase basketball from the planet? I mean, of course not. You have to learn to be discerning and to go in and protect and strengthen what is going on in there that's worthwhile. So as I was starting to develop a sense of this, I got that packet in the mail from Focus on the Family. It was like if I in my memory, it's like hundreds of pages long about all of the evils of this movie. And I remember the moment there was a disclaimer in there that whoever was putting this together, admitted that they had not actually seen the film.
Mm-hmm.
And yet there were these pages and pages of excruciating detail about all the things in the movie that were wrong. And then I would read the book, which begins with the same disclaimer that the movie does, which says that this is not meant to be the story of Jesus. This is one doubtful author's endeavor to imagine what it would be like to be both God and man. So already, right out of the gate, this is not a Christian testifying about Jesus, and this is not an enemy of Jesus trying to mislead people. It's somebody wrestling with the question. And what you get is a very curious and exploratory imagining sort of proposition. Ironically, though, the things that we were being warned about with The Last Temptation of Christ, almost all of them come during a part of the movie that is actually a vision from the character of Satan proposed to Jesus as a temptation, and Jesus rejects it. So the triumph of the movie is that Jesus looks at these evil, or these possibilities, these temptations presented to him, and that he says no. So are we to judge the movie by the temptation presented to him, or are we to judge the movie by the fact that it represents a Jesus that says no to evil?
Yeah.
And it just kind of blew my mind that people could be so thick-headed about these things. They were like, well, it shows Jesus sleeping with a woman. Well, yeah, Satan offers him a vision of just living as a normal man and having a marriage, and we see him like any other husband in bed with his wife, and Jesus says that is not what God has called me to. But they were judging the movie on that. I mean, I get worked up about this because it's still just so astonishing to me how short-sighted that is, to put it kindly. Now, is it a perfect movie? I mean, of course not. I mean, I have as much a problem with Harvey Keitel's New York accent in that movie as I have with just about anything in it. But that movie strengthened my faith. That movie made Jesus seem more human to me. It helped me imagine a human Jesus, where the Jesus I had been given by the church growing up had always seemed kind of like a stained glass window of a man with a slightly judgmental look on his face, who was kind of intimidating me into doing the right thing or else. And this was a Jesus I could have sat with next to a fire and shared a meal and commented on the weather. It really changed things for me. And my dear friend Stephen Gradanis and I will argue about the theological finer points of the film. And I admire his convictions about those things. But I'm so glad I saw that film as a high school senior and got to be a part of those conversations, because it increased and strengthened my Christian faith, quite the opposite of everything that the Focus on the Family team was so terrified would happen.
Same here. And it's a movie I still have tension with. Very hard to shake the Calvinist out of me after all these years still. And so I still find myself, well, what about this? What about this? But there is no movie that after I see it makes me think more about who Jesus was. It is a movie that I meditate with, I wrestle with, and I love it because of that.
Maybe I should have had a chapter on that. I come to think of it, I don't even think that book comes up, or that movie comes up in this book. But maybe eventually I should get around to going back and writing about that one.
There's something you mentioned from Scott Cairns in this book about a new perspective on be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That just kind of blew me away when I read it. Living here in Detroit, I've grown up around engineers, and that means most of the churches I have attended surrounded by people who are engineers and not really people who are artistically inclined necessarily. And I found there was kind of a tension between, and I don't mean to paint everyone who's an engineer with this, and but it's just my helpful way of thinking of it was, some people are approaching the faith as engineers. They want to see everything rationally, everything has to connect. Your doctrines have to build this grid. And then the artists are asking questions and feeling the faith and more open to emotion and mystery. And again, not a one-to-one, but that was helping me understand maybe why I was having some differences with some of my friends. And the way you describe how Cairns unpacks that verse made me think so much about that illustration and how we need both in the church and we need both in our lives. Do you think
Yeah.
rationality and emotion? And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, his what he gave me through a poem that is part of a series. I don't think any other poet has a series of poems called Adventures in New Testament Greek. And there's this series, he takes various terms, various Greek terms, and then since these are terms from another language, our language is not agile enough to quite grasp what those words represent in another language. This is why we need so many languages. This is what I love about Pentecost, is that God does not take all the languages and force them back into one, but blesses them all, almost as a way of saying, and you need each other because you all see aspects of the truth that the others don't see. And so you need to be in conversation and stay humble. So this poem, Adventures in New Testament Greek, colon, nous, N-O-U-S, that's the Greek term here. Um, I've heard Cairns lecture on this where he says there is no term in the English language that is quite an equivalent for nous. The Greeks understood that between the intellect and the intuition, between the mind and the heart, between rationality and feeling, there is another organ, so to speak. There is another capacity that connects them both, where they meet and mingle, and that is the nous. And it has a they gave it a physical location in the back of the throat, which is where we feel things when we are moved. But it's not just an emotion. We feel it because our mind is making a whole lot of connections, and feelings are rising up in response to that, in concert with that. And so the verse is be transformed by the renewing of your nous, not just your intellect.
Mm-hmm.
If Christians are leaning primarily into intellect, we end up making rational decisions that are very harmful. I mean, if you look around and you see people making decisions based on the bottom line, or making decisions to remain faithful to a system at the expense of human flourishing, then something's gone very wrong. And the same is true the other way. This sort of takes me back to Through a Screen Darkly and the chapter in that book about follow your heart. If you only follow your heart, meaning if you only just sort of trust your gut or your intuition, well, that is flawed too. And many of the worst decisions I've ever made have been impulse decisions based on a feeling. So the nous is asking these two things to get together and work things out. That's where discernment happens. I'm not saying this nearly as beautifully as Cairns does in that incredible poem, but in the poem, he invites us to do an exercise to actually inhale and feel the cool air move down your throat and so toward the chamber of the heart. And he says, do your thinking there.
Mm.
And that, I think, I think artists will relate to that. I think audiences will relate to that. Any of these conversations about being moved by beauty and that changing the way we think and the way we act, that's the business of the nous. So when I think about stories in scripture that kind of follow me around, increasingly I am drawn to the story of the Transfiguration. That's the story where Jesus and two of the apostles are on a mountainside, and suddenly, out of the clouds, there's Moses and Elijah in conversation with Jesus, and the apostles are like, whoa, this is it. This is the miracle. This is the revelation that this is the Son of God. We need to build a temple right here and now. From now on, people are going to come from all over the place to this place because this is where it happened. And Jesus is like, nope, we're moving on. This is not how we do things. We do not have a realization or discover a truth and then build a system around it because there's always more. And the moment you think you've arrived, the moment you think you have established a system or a culture or a theology that has all the right answers, that's the moment that God will leave you because God is on the move.
Mhm.
There's always more to be discovered. There's always a need for the other languages. There's always a need for what your neighbor is experiencing as well as what you are experiencing, and for that dialogue. And that has helped me understand better what I think Jesus is talking about when he says, I came to fulfill the law, not to abolish it, but also to introduce something new. Jesus is constantly saying, you have heard it said blank, but I say unto you blank. So
Mhm.
he's introducing new ideas and without replacing the old ones. And I think what that means is the law was established to help us. But the moment we decide that the right thing to do is always enforce the law, that's the moment we're thinking we've arrived. And we don't understand that that was just the laws were pointing us in the direction of love, but they do not fulfill it all. And so that's where Christian culture so easily starts failing when we get legalistic, when we decide that we have a list of rules to follow, because Jesus did not come to give us a new set of rules. He came to show us a right relationship with the rules and to help us understand by his own example that sometimes love asks us to not disregard a rule, but let it be flexible for the sake of grace. Let our definitions be flexible. Open ourselves to learning that the application of these laws can vary in order to truly love. And the moment we decide otherwise, the moment we decide that Christianity comes with a code, we set ourselves up for embarrassment and failure and real, real harm.
We talk a lot in churches about the fruit of the spirit, that if you're following Christ, you should be evidencing love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness,
Yeah.
gentleness, self-control. Wanted to see if I remembered all of them. Um, but it's something I thought about years ago as I'm thinking about the way Christian communities interact with others, the way that they other others. Um, was the fact that we didn't hold that same standard to our congregations. We didn't hold that same standard to the way we corporately lived out the Bible. The fruit of the Spirit was not evident because we are condemning and judging and separating others from any opportunity to engage in the conversation, to
Hmm.
even come to Jesus. And so that has kind of become a guiding stick for me is, okay, is the application of this teaching causing me or causing, collectively us as Christians to act in a way with love, joy,
Hmm.
peace? And if it's not, we kind of need to re-examine our relationship to that doctrine.
Yeah. And that's why I think you can tell the health of a Christian organization by the diversity in its leadership, or at least the openness to diversity in its leadership. I mean, it's unfair to say of a church that exists in a community where there is not much cultural diversity. It's unfair
Mm-hmm.
to say, well, there's not much diversity in their leadership, so that can't be a healthy church. I mean, there has to be the possibility of diversity in that place. But when I look at the church in America and then look at the diversity of Americans, right there you see that there is something deeply, deeply flawed,
Yeah.
because it is primarily a leadership of middle-aged to older. Well, no, I wouldn't even say middle-aged anymore. Just it is primarily a leadership of white males
Mm-hmm.
that are very, very reluctant to surrender their power. And when it comes to the really sensitive decisions, they narrow the circle to just a few of them. And that tells me there is a lack of openness to the fullness of God's revelation because it comes about through all of these different languages, these different experiences, gender, race, culture. And until we see communities modeling that well, the idea of the kingdom of God remains out of our grasp. More and more, I think about the Great Commission. God saying to Jesus saying to his apostles and disciples, "Go, therefore, you know, to all nations." Increasingly, I wonder if the intent was not just you have the gospel, you have a relationship with Jesus, um, go and share that. I increasingly think that it's much more complicated than that. That if you are going to continue to grow in relationship with me, you need to go and find out what I'm doing elsewhere.
Mhm.
They may have more to teach you than you
Yep.
have to teach them. That has definitely been my lived experience. I have learned more about God. My faith has grown more. My faith, very specifically in Jesus, has grown more from my engagement with art outside the art of the church than the art inside of the church.
Mhm.
And in a consumer culture, we are conditioned to think we have got to establish the right community and somehow attract all the kinds of people we need for that. Increasingly, I think that there's a certain unintentional arrogance in that maybe we are the missing piece in other cultures. Maybe we are the prophetic voice that needs to show up in someone else's community,
Hmm.
or maybe we're not already even to be prophets yet. Maybe we need to be listeners,
That's really good.
and join something else and see, and until we learn enough of the language to find out what God is really doing there.
So we started talking about how when you were writing for Christianity Today, you're kind of one of the first to be having these conversations about film in the faith space, right? It had been like the plugged ins, things like that. And like you mentioned, Peter Chataway's out there, Alyssa Wilkinson's out there. In the years since, have you seen that change? Because I have noticed there are more conversations happening about faith in the movies that don't have to say, "Oh, go see God's Not Dead. Go see I Can Only Imagine." It is, and I've been really blessed by Josh Larson's stuff.
Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
movies are prayers,
Yeah,
and the fact that he has a platform where he's just talking about film like a regular guy.
yeah,
He's on Film Spotting doing
yeah, yeah.
fantastic work. Alyssa Wilkinson, just maybe the best critic in America right now, is that her background was Christianity Today. Are you starting to
Yeah,
see
and
these?
another graduate of that Seattle Pacific Masters in Creative Writing program as
Oh,
well.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Are you starting to see these conversations be more open and people more open to these conversations?
Yes. I mean that that circle of critics that kind of found each other in the late 90s. We're all still in touch, but we have scattered and are on all kinds of platforms. Some of them, what some people would describe as merely secular, others in sort of progressive Christianity platforms, others still trying to shake and wake up those factions of evangelical culture that are still deeply rooted in fear. But yeah, the walls that once made for a very simple map have come down. And people, I mean, Josh Larson's a great example because he's also, he was the editor at Think Christian for so long. So he was writing for evangelical Christians, working with a team of evangelical Christians, writing about the arts. And then he would put on his film spotting hat and go back to that podcast, which is I think arguably the greatest film podcast going in the world.
100%.
Um, it has the drive to cover just about everything for a global audience, and they have an adoring global audience without pandering, without compromising their integrity. And he's not a different person when he's in those different places. He's just leaning into different aspects of his vocabulary. to speak to very different kinds of needs and questions. I think he's a great example of this, and I think this is what happens. This is why the fear in the church has hurt it so badly in America for so many generations. Is that when a believer leans into courage, pursues truth, pursues beauty, what they have to offer in response to that will be relevant to everyone. This is why certain Christian artists, their books are in the literature section of the bookstore rather than the Christian literature section of the bookstore. Tolkien, Lewis, Madeleine L'Engle, Marilyn Robinson, Toni Morrison, these are people of deep faith whose stories are beloved around the world and are shining lights throughout the world because of the lack of any kind of fear about uncertainty, the lack of any reluctance to wrestle with hard questions. Flannery O'Connor, of course, another sort of patron saint of this kind of thing. Scott Cairns as a poet, published in the Paris Review, and world renowned. I mean, I could go on. The list is impressively long. In 48 hours, I will be up in Bellingham, Washington at the memorial service for Lucy Shaw, the poet. And we will be in her church with her fellow churchgoers there at St. Paul's in Bellingham. But there will be readers, fans of hers from all over the world sort of tuning into this. And it's because of that. And so I think that, I mean, back to your question about the film critics, the audience has always been hungry for art that deals with spiritual questions. They just didn't want to have to deal with judgmental and narrow-minded Christian media. And this also goes back to your question about the engineers, right? The rationalists. Christians, in withdrawing from the world, kind of developed this code or this system by which to judge art, which kept them from opening themselves to it. And they saw opening themselves to art as being an act of dangerous vulnerability. But art is about beauty, and beauty is where God lives. And there is nothing that limits God's revelation to just people in the church. I mean, just look at the natural world and you see God revealing himself all over the place. So anywhere people are being moved by art, I suspect God is up to something there. And so as these definitions, as these codes have kind of collapsed, and those who cling to them look increasingly desperate and increasingly alienated, so many more people are finding this flourishing conversation in the middle, between the extremes, where God likes to work. It reminds me of that time Marilyn Robinson showed up on The Daily Show and spoke to Jon Stewart, and they were talking about her new book on science and faith. And Jon Stewart was like, you look at the news and you see a scientist and a person of faith, and they're just shouting at each other. And it's like, so who's right in how they view the world? Scientists or religion, science or religion? And Marilyn Robinson, being very sly, just kind of smiled and said, "Who's right? I am." But then she went on to say, that the gladiators of both sides are the worst representatives of both sides. And that what you will find if you step out of that binary thinking is this vast community of scientists and people of faith in dialogue with each other, people of faith who are working in science, people of science who are fascinated by faith, discovering that these are two languages for the same thing, and that we have so much to learn from each other. And that's where the real work is being done, making the gladiators look extremely ridiculous the more attention you pay to the complexity. That feels like a good analogy for what's going on in the conversation about the arts now. That Alyssa Wilkinson is at the New York Times, Josh Larson is on Film Spotting. It kind of frustrated me when I walked into a bookstore today and saw my new book in the Christian literature section.
Right next to Tim Tebow, I saw.
Right, right next to that. I wanted it in the film section because there are a lot of people in that conversation who want this piece of it. I believe and they are the ones who inspired it. So I was writing it more to them than to the people that only go to this section of the bookstore over here.
I noticed Matt Zoller Seitz wrote the foreword to this book, and he
Yes.
also wrote the foreword to Movies Are Prayers.
Hmm.
And I don't know, his faith background or anything, but I remember him writing in Movies Are Prayers that it was the critics who were talking about faith who kind of were the most interesting to him these days. They're having interesting conversations.
Yeah, I was a big fan of him many years ago. And when he was chosen by Chaz Ebert, Robert's wife, to sort of step into Roger's shoes when Roger Ebert died and to sort of lead what RogerEbert.com would become, he was writing what compelled me about his writing was the spiritual questions at the heart of so much of what he was asking. And he would identify back then as agnostic or leaning atheist. I'm not quite sure the vocabulary that he was putting forward there. But he wrote to me out of the blue once and said that he was interested in doing an article about the theology of the Coen brothers.
Hmm.
He said, you consistently are finding theological themes in their work, and I wonder if maybe we could have a conversation about this and then publish it. And I was absolutely thunderstruck. I mean, this is one of my heroes from the pantheon of great film criticism stepping out of the sky and inviting me to something. I couldn't believe it. So we stayed up late into the night, just basically texting each other back and forth. I think it started on Facebook and then moved to email, if I remember right. And then he just published that conversation that we had about things we saw going on in the Coen Brothers movies. And I realized this is the richest conversation I've had on this subject, and I'm not having it with somebody from my quote unquote team of Christian film critics. And the conversation continued and has for years. So I was, again, absolutely thunderstruck when he volunteered out of the blue when he heard that this book was coming, when he volunteered to write the foreword. I just thought that is perfect. That kind of, in a way, it doesn't complete an arc, but it marks a turning point in my own writing about film that now I feel like I finally have both feet planted in a place where I'm in dialogue with so many different kinds of people, where I'm learning from them, and lo and behold, sometimes to my surprise, they learn something from me. So to have his blessing on it is going to be seen by some people as having
Hmm.
sold out to the world.
Hmm.
But it's where I've wanted to be all along, which is having a conversation about faith and art with all kinds of people, learning from them, and being grateful that I get to reflect some of the light I received back to them. So I'm so grateful for his participation in this. He's on a journey himself. I mean, he would tell you that his relationship with faith has changed in 10, 15, 20 years. But he's also been on a very painful life journey that
Mm-hmm.
has forced him to wrestle with questions that others haven't. And that's a story for another time. But I admire him so much, and his writing is so insightful. I've learned a lot from him.
He wrote a book with Alan Sepinwall, the Sopranos book. And I went through watching The Sopranos, and every episode I would go back to the chapter they wrote about that episode. And it was so deep and made me think so deeply about a TV show I had written off as just,
Yeah,
gangster fiction.
yeah,
And right back here, I have TV, the book that he also wrote with Alan
yeah.
Sepinwall. And it's
His
like a TV Bible for me.
his coffee table books about Wes Anderson films are incredible. I mean, they're big enough to be coffee tables themselves, and um, he understands that every aspect of a Wes Anderson movie is contributing to the central question, the central theme. And so you get pages and pages on costumes, pages on color schemes, pages on casting, and then these deep dive interviews that he does. My friend Lauren Wilford was invited to write a book for that series about the movie Isle of Dogs. And that book is like going to film school, just with a focus on one particular film, but you learn about so many other things. It's again, with that concept of the university, by by looking at one film with all of these different lenses, we learn about all kinds of things and each other. And that's, yeah, that's I think that's kind of what the churches I grew up in meant when they described the Bible as a living word. It's always revealing new things, and anywhere you find something true or beautiful, that's the case. It's funny,
Um,
we've been talking now for almost 90 minutes, and we have said very little about particular movies.
I
And
hope that's not a disappointment. I want people to
no,
read your
no, I
book.
think that means the project is working. It's
Great.
like the movies really do lead us to understand much deeper things. And so there's a chapter on Totoro, there's a chapter on the Black Stallion, there's a chapter on Moonrise Kingdom, but this is what it's about,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's like I saw Francis Ford Coppola speak at the Detroit. No, he was at Henry Ford Museum about a year ago, and I expected
Hmm.
him to talk about his movies the whole time, and all of a sudden he's talking agriculture and history,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and at some point someone shouts out to him, "Talk about the movie," and he just, which was Megalopolis. So I don't know if they wanted that, but he just shouts out, "This is the movie. This is
Yeah,
all what the movie is." And I saw the movie, and he's right.
yeah.
But it's funny because my final question to you is, as you think about the next few years, and hopefully we get a third book of film writing from you, who are
Hmm.
you paying attention to right now? Who are the artists who are most making you interested about the ways they approach beauty and mystery and faith?
Well, it's every year since I was 13 or 14 years old, I've had this ritual of making a list of the movies of the year that meant the most to me that year and the albums of the year that meant the most to me that year. And those, with each passing year, that project becomes more time consuming because I have stronger vocabularies as I get older, for how to talk about those things. And so it just can go on for pages. I think it took me until the end of March, early April this year to publish my favorite movies of 2025 because I just couldn't stop writing and because I was working on the book. But I am increasingly drawn to films, if we're talking films specifically, from certain parts of the world that are in even greater distress than the United States is right now, although we're starting to give them a run for their money. The movies coming out of Iran over the last few years have been astonishing. I mean, they've been astonishing for a long time. I mean, Kiarostami is right up there with Kieslowski for me, the great filmmakers whose names begin with K and end with I, um, as the filmmakers who have taught me the most and who minister to me the most. But the movies coming out of Iran recently have been just so provocative and profound. At the same time, movies being made by women about the injustices being that have been suffered by women throughout history, and that are still, I mean, it's standing out, I think, in sharper and sharper contrast now. Just how those abuses of power continue. Films like Sarah Polley's adaptation of Women Talking
Yes.
in 2025, my favorite film of the year, the one that moved me the most and that I'm finding most meaningful to share with audiences right now, is Rangano Neoni's On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, which takes place in Zambia, but boy, will that get an audience talking about the Epstein files. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it is an incredible movie about the insidious nature of patriarchal systems, the insidious nature of systems that protect and enable abusers.
Hmm.
So insidious, so toxic, in fact, that the systems themselves are being protected and supported by women. That's one of the most terrible ironies in On Becoming a Guinea Fowl is that the men are malevolent and recklessly irresponsible and violent, but that movie is filled with women who don't want anything to change, and
Hmm.
so they're fighting to prop up the system that has ruined their lives. And having said that, it's an extremely entertaining, suspenseful, and sometimes very funny film. So
It's a
it's a
wonderful movie. I
remarkable
love that.
thing. I can't wait to see where Neoni's career takes her because this is only the second film of hers I know. It seems like she's just getting going. So those are the films that I'm excited about and I would love to write about. There were several chapters I had to cut from this book just because of it was ballooning and becoming too unmanageable. But I wanted to do a chapter on Sisako's film Timbuktu, which is about a Muslim community fracturing under the violence and pressure of extremists who impose Sharia law on them. And if you look into that film, you are looking into a mirror of what's happening in Christian culture in America right now. And it will help you love your neighbor and discover what you have to learn from them. So those are things I feel drawn to write about and get audiences talking about going forward. I've always wanted to do a sort of step sideways and write a book of a similar nature about music, because in some ways music has had as much or more to do my journey than movies have. It's just that movies are easier to write about because there's more of an audience for that.
Mm.
But to tell you the truth, the thing that I'm most eager to invest in now, it's been almost 15 years since I last really took fiction writing seriously. And in studying Pinocchio, I learned that the author of The Adventures of Pinocchio, the original Italian novel, was a political activist involved in two military revolutions, who eventually kind of surrendered from those endeavors in despair and devoted himself to what he thought would do more good in the long run for the rest of the world. And that was to write stories for children that reflected what was going on in the world. And that's where we got Pinocchio, which is one of the two or three most beloved and influential and translated works of fiction in history. So maybe that's a good direction to go.
Good read it.
I miss writing fiction. That's always been my deepest passion. So
You would have a pre-order from day one from me. I would 100%.
well, thank you, Chris. That's one. We'll start there.
I want to thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous with your time, and I
Oh,
have
my pleasure.
enjoyed this conversation. And I highly recommend Lost and Found in the Cathedral of Cinema. You can buy it wherever you get your books. And also, I would recommend Add Through a Screen Darkly to that. I think it is still a book I turn to a lot to have conversations with people and get them started thinking about films. So thank you for those, and thank you again for taking the time.
It's been a joy. It's been a little overdue, I think, and I hope we'll do it again sometime.
I hope so too.
Take care.